You see a lot, Doctor? But are you strong enough to point that high-powered perception at yourself? What about it? Why don't you look at yourself and write down what you see? Maybe you're afraid to.
A census taker once tried to test me. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti. You fly back to school now, little Starling. Fly, fly,
fly. Hello everyone, this is PK Entertainment and we are back again, and here now we have another video review, and we're going to take a look back on The Silence of the Lambs and just establish on how good of an adaptation it is and the movie's overall legacy and impact within popular culture. Released on February the 14th, 1991, it stars Anthony Hopkins, Jodie Foster and Scott Glen, and it was directed by Johnathan Demme. Adapted from the novel of the same name, which was written by Thomas Harris, it tells the story of FBI Agent Clarice Sterling, who is assigned on the case of tracking down notorious serial killer Buffalo Bill. To try and gauge into the psyche of the killer, Clarice is asked to consult with another notorious cannibal serial killer, Dr Hannibal Lecter, who's being kept in a maximum security confinement. During the line of questioning, the two begin to form a mutual understanding as Lecter gets Clarice to reflect on her past, including a childhood experience of where she heard young lambs being slaughtered. Now Lecter agrees to help assist in the tracking of Buffalo Bill on the condition that he's transferred away from his current facility. Buffalo Bill's reign continues as he kidnaps the daughter of a United States Senator. As the search for Bill continues, Clarice continues to be drawn to Lecter's influence as he secretly plans to escape imprisonment. Now when looking back on The Silence of the Lambs, it's often been referred to as an iconic horror film, but I've always perceived it more as a psychological murder mystery with elements of a serial killer thriller with much more of a police procedural included in there as well. As a movie itself, it's very accomplished and crafted in terms of its story. It's very classy and sophisticated. It builds up a nice sense of tension and suspense all the way through. Yes, there are graphic scenes of violence, physical abuse and torture, and they can be very unsettling and unnerving at times, but I don't think it's a gratuitous movie that's constantly looking for shocks or scares every 5 minutes. It certainly builds a very brooding, dark tone and atmosphere, definitely within the first half. Now of course the movie is completely defined by the pivotal performances of its two lead actors. You simply cannot talk about this movie without mentioning Sir Anthony Hopkins, who in this role as Hannibal Lecter very much cemented his own legacy as well as the movies, creating one of the most iconic villains in all of movie history, though it could be argued that he's not as much the main antagonist here, but much more of a supporting character to Sterling's own story. Regardless, his performance elevates everything within this film with his eeriness and coldness and menace. Yet this isn't a raging psychopath, this is much more of an articulate, very softly spoken character. And this is in many ways what makes him a much more threatening antagonist, as there's always a plan, there's always a hidden motive or strategy behind his words. And when watching this movie for the first time, you're constantly guessing as to what his next move will be and when he'll make it. And that's a great element for any character, and Hopkins just keeps you watching and hooked all the way through this entire film. It truly is one of the all-time great performances, and what's so key to the performance and the film itself is Lecter's influence over Jodie Foster's Clarice Sterling. Now already on the way to becoming one of the industry's most formidable actresses, Jodie Foster here is much more of a vulnerable yet resolute character. And that vulnerability is shown a lot, especially in the early part of the film, where she seems to be the object of all of the main characters' desires. We have constant scenes of everybody hitting on her, and at times she seems to be completely oblivious to it all. And the film actually came under some heavy criticism of the aspects of this portrayal of the character. But it is of course Clarice's relationship with Lecter that's the real core of this movie. Every time they're together on screen, the movie just goes up another level. The dynamic between them is absolutely fascinating as we see how Clarice is drawn to Lecter, which raises questions about her own personality itself. We can see why Lecter is drawn to her, as she's the first real person that he's had an actual interaction with ever since his imprisonment. His previous experience as a doctor or psychiatrist means he'll always be interested in her motivations. But Clarice's continued involvement I've always found to be very strange here. Whilst it's not a sexual attraction and the movie never hints at this, I see it much more as a young woman yearning for a father figure, and this is in keeping with her reveal of losing her father when she was 10 years old. I think it also relates to Lecter being one of the few men actually showing an interest in her that's non-sexual. That Lecter's constant inquisition about her life makes her feel much more appreciated. And it's always that tendency that I see in stories and mainstream culture, how female characters are attracted and drawn to male serial killers. Maybe they feel they can reform them, maybe they sympathise with them. We look at it also as perhaps an ego trip, that they want to show others that they can connect to the one person that everybody else is scared of. But whatever the connection, I think it works very well throughout this film, and the movie never tries to develop a physical attraction or a love story between the two characters, and that would have taken away some credibility in terms of the character dynamic. But yes, all of the scenes between both actors are truly fantastic together, and this is when the movie is at its strongest. Now, the movie itself isn't perfect. For all of the compelling presence that we get with Lecter, we sadly don't get the same as what we do with Buffalo Bill, who is the real villain of the story. Now, I understand they wanted to have this more erratic, unbalanced individual to ramp up all of the intensity, but he just comes across as a little bit jokey for me. The film also loses some focus in terms of its narrative whenever it shifts towards Lecter's planned escape, which is still very unlikely given the notoriety of him as a killer and as a criminal. The fact that we would have such lax security around him really does strain credibility, but I guess that's more of a flaw in terms of the original source material. So when we then look at the release of the movie, and it was a massive success, grossing over $272.7 million worldwide on just a budget of $19 million, staying at the top of the box office within the US for over 5 weeks. It confirmed its critical acclaim by winning 5 Oscars for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actress and Best Adapted Screenplay, becoming only the 3rd film at the time to win all of these major categories. Now, as stated before, the movie really transformed Anthony Hopkins into one of the most celebrated actors within the industry. His role as Hannibal Lecter guaranteeing his legacy by playing one of the most notorious screen villains in all of cinema. He would return to the role later on in the sequel Hannibal from 2001, which, despite being an even bigger commercial success than the first film, grossing over $351 million, it garnered far less critical acclaim. Now, a 3rd movie in the series titled Red Dragon was also released in 2002, starring Hopkins again alongside Edward Norton, in what was very much a prequel to The Silence of the Lambs and essentially a redo of the Michael Mann movie in 1986 titled Manhunter, which also adapted the same story from the 1981 novel. And when we look back at Michael Mann's film, people will always draw comparisons between both Manhunter and Silence of the Lambs, asking which is the superior film. Now, it's a tough choice, as both are equally accomplished as they are flawed, but if push came to shove, I'd probably have to go with Silence of the Lambs, as that's the one movie that I think I could watch again if I had to choose between the two. I just find it a bit more compelling, a bit more involving and eventful, and it's probably more memorable due to Anthony Hopkins' performances. And when we talk about being memorable, The Silence of the Lambs still leaves a big impression when watching it recently. This was back in the days when a smaller scale movie could go on to achieve massive mainstream success over a sustained amount of time. And alongside one of cinema's great villains in Hannibal Lecter, The Silence of the Lambs still remains a very iconic and memorable and impressionable film many years after its overall release. So there's my overall thoughts and feelings and look back on The Silence of the Lambs. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you believe it still ranks today as a great psychological thriller, or do you see it much more as a horror film, or do you see it as having elements of both? Let me know what you think in the comments. How do you think Anthony Hopkins' role as Hannibal Lecter still stands today amongst the greatest characters within all of cinema? Do you have it right up there, or do you think there are further characters that rank above him? Let me know what you think. And if you'd like to see me review more horror films of this genre or psychological serial killer thrillers, then also drop me a suggestion within the comments. Or if you have any other films or movies or television series or any other topics within the industry of entertainment that you'd like to see me cover, then also let me know within the comments, and I will see if I can provide further commentary for you on those topics in the future. Please also hit and like the subscription and notification buttons so I can provide you with more high quality content like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, stay at safe distances, and I will see you very, very soon.